Well, welcome to everybody, both live and online here, following up here. And this is, I think, the last Professional Learning Network session for the school year. And want to kind of build on what Katie talked about last month with the lesson screening and developing the pieces, gathering the materials there. So we're looking at three-dimensional learning, lesson planning. And my name's Dan Sitzman. I was once Jody. I was the president of NATS and also a former president of the Nebraska Academy of Sciences. And both of those organizations work jointly to support science teachers across the state and also work together with larger national organizations, NSTA, NCELA, AAAS, and those are the ones coming off the top of my head. So some great resources that we have here available. Today, I want to start the story talking about a little bit about where I was as a teacher a number of years ago. Once upon a time, I had some 8th graders build and launch model rockets as we studied the solar system. And it was always about this time of year. So I loved this week. Students were busy. Many of them were excited. I spent 2 beautiful spring days outside. Students followed their step-by-step directions and built from a kit over 3 days. And then we spent 2 days so each student could say they launched their rocket once. And I gave every student a grade from that. And on the side launch days, I'd have several students try to determine the height achieved. And I'd send a few students downwind to retrieve their rockets. And everybody else held onto the rocket and helped count down for each launch. So we'll come back to that just in a minute, but just want to review the 3 dimensions of teaching and learning. Means that all 3 dimensions, the science and engineering practices, the disciplinary core ideas, the cross-cutting concepts, are all intertwined throughout the learning, from the initial introduction through all the assessment. And the 3-dimension spiral and a learning progression from kindergarten through grade 12, as well as within the year-long course. So when I go back to my rocket lesson, I look at what 3D teaching is, and I never really focused on students making sense of the rocket launches. It was a great activity, but I can't explain my thinking now why I thought that building a rocket coherently flowed together with the solar system. The rockets never left the schoolyard, except the one time I used a C engine, inserted it on a breezy day, and that sucker landed about a mile away in a Walmart parking lot. But what was it that the students were doing to develop their understanding of the solar system, to engage in science practices, and to connect with cross-cutting concepts? So when I look back at this lesson, I had some things that were disjointed and kind of need some work there. So then when I think about where do we get our lessons, and as I've worked with teachers, especially new teachers over the last several years, I kind of see some trends of where they're getting their lesson ideas. One is the Google. So the other day I Googled the solar system lessons, and I've got over 1 million results. And some of those are some good sources. First several things that I clicked on there had some worksheets and lessons plans that make models of the solar system. And I'm thinking making models, that's one of the SCPs. That's great, right? Well, I'll start looking at them a little bit more, and there's one of the models that pops up on Pinterest. And if you've got a student that's like, well, I'm going to go on Pinterest and figure out how to build a model of the solar system, I guess one of the things you'd have to look at is, how does this help you as a teacher and as your student understand the parts of the solar system? There's a lot of misconceptions there, a lot of inaccuracies, and you'd have to have that dialogue with that student. I mean, there would be some pieces in here if this is a student making a model to uncover their thinking, but if this is just the one thing they're doing, there's some big gaps there. So if you don't follow Ted Willard on Twitter from NSTA, he's got some great things. And one of the things that he tweeted last year about this time is, I'm getting tired of hearing what standard applies to this activity. And he's saying we've got it backwards. We need to start with the standard and fill in with activities that fit in. The other piece that really is a big challenge is when we think of implementing anything that's based on the frameworks, whether it's the Nebraska College and Career Ready Standards for Science, or if you're in other states working with NGSS, is saying, well, I already do this already. If I tell you my story about the rockets, there's a lot of pieces, a lot of gaps that I have there, and really could say I wasn't teaching in 3 dimensions. So it's a good chance for all of us, no matter if we're in our first years or if we're in our 3rd decade, to look at how we're teaching and how we're designing our lesson plans. So there's a number of structures that are out there for designing lesson plans, and Katie kind of touched on some of these last month. The typical recommendation is that the review of lesson plans takes place with peers rather than isolation. And in a state, Nebraska, where we have so many people that have small science departments, or they are their science department, this is where NSTA, NATS, Nebraska Academy of Sciences, and NCELA, and others can assist with workshops and conferences, professional networks, and online learning such as we're doing today. So what I want to focus on now with this next part is kind of talk about my experience recently as I review and write 3D lessons. And as I go through this, I'm bouncing ideas around with a team. And the team I'm working with is a K-12 team. We have a primary, a intermediate, middle school, and high school teacher experienced on it. We have some individual tasks that we break out. We come together, continue to collaborate. And it's essentially, it's important not only to talk these things out, but to see and hear from other people's perspectives. And there's several well-regarded ways to evaluate lessons to determine how they address skills and content from the frameworks. And a couple of them, one of them is RTOP, the Reformed Teaching Observation Protocol. Another one is what Katie had talked about last month, is EQUIP. And another piece that she mentioned was the lesson screener from NSTA. I like to take this one here, and especially if I would recommend for people trying to transition to that 3-dimension lesson, to kind of look for a common thread. Look where your students are actively involved in the science and engineering practices. In my work with teachers, I've paired this rubric with a checklist adapted from Douglas Llewellyn. So using this of trying to figure out where am I, let's say if I'm a middle school teacher and I want to work on asking questions and defining problems, what do I need to do to support students with that? And then take a look at what Douglas Llewellyn's developed and just kind of go through and look at some of the lessons that I have. So I put the date there, the topic, and I look at that lesson and say, okay, do I have students, when I look at that NSTA rubric, are they asking questions, defining problems? So if we go back to that, are students asking questions that arise from careful observation of phenomena, models, or unexpected results? Are students asking questions that require sufficient and appropriate empirical evidence to answer? So kind of look at that, go through and check that, and go through several weeks worth of lessons and see where are their strengths, where are some gaps in what I'm currently doing. That might be a way for people to start if you feel overwhelmed by the EQUIP rubric or by RTOP. The one tool that I'm using right now with my team, thanks to the last 2 years being trained by Sarah Cooper and her team, as well as begin writing a unit using the 5 tools. And this comes from the American Museum of Natural History, some great stuff. And like Ted Willard tweeted, these tools provide lesson writers with a framework that starts with a standard digs into the performance expectation, uses the 5E instructional model to develop a flow of learning sequences over 5 to 7 lessons, and uses the evidence of learning specifications from our Nebraska College and Career Ready Standards for Science to develop the performance task. And as an experienced teacher, this has been humbling for me as I look at lessons like the model rockets and realize that I was not uncovering what students were thinking about the solar system. This process has been exciting for me, though, that I've never drilled down so deeply into developing a unit that integrates the content, the science practices, the concepts, and ongoing assessment. So using these tools here, first tool kind of gets into the standards. And Kristen, have you've been through the 5 tools training with Sarah, so each of you are familiar with this. I don't know who else we have on the phone there, but as we go through here, we use the tools to interact with the flow of things. And like I mentioned, performance expectations, drill down on those, look at the assessment task, and develop the assessment with that. Trying to get all of it to be coherent is important. And when we look at also the storyline, to be able to use coherence and storyline to drive it so that everything flows together. And that has also been a humbling experience as we sat down with our team and looked at the 5 tools screener to be able to see where our gaps were. And I think let's see, here's the slide here. So we went through this and we had another group that we were working with go through our lesson plans and use this tool from tool 4 of the 5 tools. And they gave us written feedback and we were able to see where our gaps were. As you can see on C there, this is from an explain activity. We didn't really have the students define the terminology and then have the teacher help bring that together for the students. So that's one of the things we had to go back and revise that lesson so that we made sure that that piece was in there. So this tool, if you haven't used it before, it's several pages long for each lesson as you go through, but it gives a chance to see what you're doing well. And at the bottom part there, what are some things that are distracting ideas that are suggested to get rid of, and some other ways to get some feedback from people. So it's been a great tool to use. It can be intimidating though. One of the other things that I think has been very helpful as we've gone through is to use the evidence of learning statements that are in our teacher guide in the Nebraska College and Career Ready Standards. And in this case, we had the other group just kind of go through and look at the performance expectations that we said we were hitting. And they gave us some feedback on this too, to allow us to see where we're at. And as you can see, there's some evidence statements that we were only partially hitting, and gave us some chance to go back and rebuild and revise what we had planned there for the storyline that we had developed.
Hey, so, Dan, this is Betsy on the line too.
Hi,
sorry.
Betsy.
I got in a little late, but
okay.
I'm here.
And I see James Blake is on now.
Sweet.
Yep. So, hey, Dan. Thanks for taking this one. Also late, but we've used 5 tools a lot in our district too, and it's worked well.
Yeah, it's a great tool, and you know, I think it might be a challenge for some of the smaller districts and smaller schools that might not have a lot of people to work with, but I think that's where some possible next steps might come in. If you're feeling overwhelmed by it or want to kind of dip your toe in the sand, one of the big recommendations is just to shift in a comfortable activity to engage students in 1 or 2 specific science and engineering practices for each lesson. maybe get that whole foot in the water is to use that self-assessment that I showed earlier from like Llewellyn, or use an RTOP or an equip, like Katie talked about last month. Or if you want to get that whole leg in or jump in there, develop that storyline for a lesson sequence, where students will figure out that content, and using those 5 tools are great pieces there. So at this point, just kind of open it up for discussion with everybody, and glad to hear. I know Sarah and her team and some of you have been involved with that, and just kind of get a chance to talk it out.
So just one opportunity here. This summer, Anya Covarrubias from South Sioux City and I are going to go get trained in the 5 tools out in Colorado. And so we're hoping to have some ongoing PD using those 5 tools, not only at NATS, but throughout the school year. So anybody who's interested in diving in that direction, we're going to have some support at the state level for that through NATS.
That's great, because two of my colleagues, Christina Argo and Christina Wildhagen, they've been through the training several times and keep learning things as they go through it. So there's some great aha moments every time you go through it.
Yeah, our training is going to be a week long. So it's going to be pretty intense, and hopefully we'll come out of it, ready to train others how to use it. So, Anya and I are really looking forward to that opportunity, and then on the other end, the opportunity to share. So
now, how do you do it, Betsy, with your school district where you're a little smaller than like a Lincoln or an Omaha? How do you use the 5 tools right now?
Well, I would say all I have really done is dabble with it. We have not sat down formally and used the 5 tools as a group. It's kind of been on an individual basis. 2 of our high school teachers, however, did go to the training. I believe it was in Council Bluffs, maybe. Cindy Larson Miller and Cindy Larson Miller and Dave Henning went to that, and they came back and gave us just kind of a brief introduction to it. But honestly, the way we are anticipating possibly using the training that I will go to here at the end of July is to use that in some of our pre-student day professional development to start, trying to create that coherent 3-dimensional curriculum. Certainly it's going to be a big task, in part because we don't have, time other than our plan time dedicated to preparing our lessons, preparing our curriculum. And it's really unclear right now as a district where we're headed in terms of curriculum resources. We're starting to look at a few. We might be looking at a pilot this fall. Those decisions haven't been made yet. So I don't know if I answered your question, Dan, but that's kind of what's on the table right now for us. I would say it's not centrally organized at our district, in part because we just don't have the structures in place for that to happen, other than in very small groups, like in small groups that we choose to get together with outside of our normal school time, basically. So
but it's a start.
It is.
And you're really lucky that you get to do a week, because I was at Council Bluffs and had to do it in like 2.5. It was
yeah.
That's
so. Yeah, I'm really excited about this. I think it looks like it's pretty intense, and excited to be out in Colorado Springs for a week too. Though I won't lie about that. So
Well, Kristen and Jody, how have you used the 2.5 day trainings or 2 day trainings that you've gone through?
Well, that's the interesting part. We'll see how this next year. It's taken me a year to really convince administration in my building that this is coming down the pipeline and we need to get on top of it. And it wasn't until about 2-3 months ago when they were like, wait, we have the president of the Science Teachers Association and we're like behind the ball. And I said, yes. And this is why I've been in your office trying to get you to push this forward. So I still have some meetings with my administration, but I mean, ideally, hopefully what we can do in the future is with Kristen's help, we can hopefully create like a team so that it's more not just me building this stuff by myself, but I take something and, you know, we get together and once or twice a year with other local schools that are very similar in size, and we're able to kind of share our resources because there's nothing out there right now for a high school curriculum. I mean, that's in my opinion. So
For storylines, or what do you mean?
well, just like if you were, so one of the things that school districts are going to see is, oh, we got new standards. We need to get curriculum that lines up to our new standards. And there's nothing out there yet that really just does the job. I mean, you've got Amplify and some of those things that you can get for some of the lower grades, but nothing at the high school level. So hopefully school districts understand the importance of the professional development and providing teachers with resources of being able to go out and, you know, work with other science teachers.
Kristen, what's it look like from your perspective so far?
So after attending the 5 tools, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I'm in a basement. All right. After attending the 5 tools training, I felt motivated to start utilizing, but I will tell you there have not utilized. When it was mentioned earlier about dabbling, haven't really even started dabbling. This year was mostly exploring and talking the 3-dimensional vocabulary, understanding this instructional shift and what should you start preparing for, developing a working team in your district, or what small school districts can work together. I offered 2 workshop days. One was K through 5th grade and one was 6th through 12th grade, but I only had about 6 teachers that showed from our 14 school districts for those 2 days. So I feel like we had Sarah Cooper in October. I feel like there's a good understanding that there is a shift, but actually unpacking the standards, understanding them enough to utilize the 5 tools is what we're going to start this summer.
Yeah, and for me, just being able to dig into the 5 tools really helps understand the standards better. It's a cyclical piece. You understand the standards, now you get in the 5 tools, and now you understand the standards a little better because like I said, like I kind of showed back with this piece here, where there are some things that I thought we were hitting and thought we were covering, and when we had some peers review it and realized, yeah, we were still kind of short there. So we looked at it and it's like, oh man, that is something we need to hit. So it really helps bring the performance expectations and those evidence statements alive as you go through and use those 5 tools to plan.
Yes, I feel like I'm just now getting teachers oriented to the teacher's guide. That's kind of the level we're at right now.
Where are you finding, and it looks like James left, but where are all of you finding teachers when they start seeing the massive documents that are there? How do you help guide?
They haven't seen them yet. You'd be so surprised at how many teachers looked at our new standards and they kind of just saw like the draft copy of it and they're like, oh, we got this. They don't understand the depth at which they go into.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the next piece. You know, if you were familiar with NGSS, you understood, you saw the draft that, you know, we all saw, but we also understood what that truly meant. But for a lot of teachers, they don't. I mean, I give the example of, you know, last summer I worked with my district, my elementary teachers, and I just wanted to introduce them kind of to three-dimensional learning and to what these new standards look like. And my administration just was like, oh, okay, these are going to be what the new standards look like. Yep. And they then went and took my elementary teachers and said, okay, align our curriculum that we have to these standards. And so now they have this misconception in their head that that's all it is. And there's just so much more to it than that. So, I mean, it's a beast, and I really don't know what to do.
About working with your administration, one of the things that we discovered or rediscovered as we went through the handouts in the 5 tools and tool 4, there's like 40 pages of handouts, but pages 1 and 2 are these pages up on the screen here. And to be able to present these to evaluators, those principals, the people that are going to be coming into your classroom to evaluate, to be able to say, here's one thing that ties in with what we're supposed to be doing in science, have this help evaluate the classroom. Where if you have somebody that was an administrator that was not a science teacher, or even if they were a science teacher, to walk into a classroom and say, well, you know, the kids are busy, they're compliant, everything's good, but to be able to say, here's what we're looking for 3 dimensions, where we've got a teacher that might not give the answers right away for students, that might tell students that they're not wrong at that point, to create that fuzziness and build that relationship. And that's going to look very different for administrators coming in for evaluations. So, you know, with your work with administrators, you maybe take a look at these 2 pages here and just see what teachers do and what students do with the 3 dimensions in the 5E learning.
It can
What
be.
I would say about
okay.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I was going to say, go back to Dan's question about what are our teachers thinking. I feel like our teachers in our district are on so many different pages. And we haven't really had a concerted effort to even begin to take a look at, what I want to say, that like the teacher docs, I don't think anybody's probably even looked at those. And when I hear Jody talking about the conversations she's having with her administrators, I'm a little jealous because those are conversations that need to be had, and they're not happening at Norris right now.
But I think when you look at what Sarah's talked about too, is we're looking at a long process here. This is not something that we're going to be able to jump in successfully and do next year. It's something that really truly is, if you look at the research, about a 5 to 7 year implementation to get everybody in. And we've talked about it too, is how do you get students to shift their thinking that the teacher's not going to give me the answer right away? How do I stay with it and have that persistence to try and figure it out on my own? So that's a cultural shift too that's going to happen administratively, teacher-wise, as well as the students and the parents. James, you're back on. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm waiting for Owen to get done with his voice lesson, sitting in the car. But I missed a little bit of that. I don't want to take us in the weeds, but just a quick kind of infomercial. We're using this as the backbone of the Science Soybean Institute, which I think has potential to fill some of the space left in the wake of losing kicks. The soybean board's been really supportive. We were able to open to 6 non-Lincoln spots where they're coming from as far as Paxton. And I think that's another area, but this has been the template that we use is 5Es, 5 tools. And I just think there's no one recipe, there's no one right way. There's lots of good ways, and this is definitely one of them.
Couple things too that I found when we look at like the ACT as a high school group, when you look at what their college and career ready standards are, this is one thing that when we were trying to figure out what we needed to include in our storyline, we went back and looked at this too to kind of help develop and make sure what we were doing aligned with the ACT also. And I'm trying to remember where I pulled this. This comes from the from ACT, obviously, with their standards. So if we're trying to get students above 20 or 20, if you get them above 23, then they're considered ready for science. So where are the opportunities that we're building in there, whether it's in 5th grade or in 7th and 8th grade or 9th and 10th grade, to support students as they go through the curriculum, just going beyond identifying things and giving students opportunity to, for example, analyze presented information when given new information. So that's another tool that's out there that we don't have to jump full into the 5 tools if your district's not ready for it, but another piece to look at as you continue to plan your lessons.
Just to spin off what James was saying, I think, you know, what's important here is that we've got some tools, not necessarily just the 5 tools, but whether you're talking about STEM teaching tools, the 5 tools, you know, storylines, or the other documents, which are more for evaluation that, you know, that Katie mentioned. We've got options, and you kind of got to figure out what works for you. I just hope we're getting to the point that we realize we've got to be looking for things, you know, and not have that attitude like Jody saying, "Oh, we got this," without really digging into the shift and what that looks like.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to go to NSTA this year, but I had a colleague that went to Reiser Novak's presentation. And Reiser's got some great stuff out there, some great printed materials that we've really found has been helpful in informing our writing and using the tools. And I like this slide from their presentation, just kind of a simple way that might support people. It's just like Betsy said, another tool that is out there, and just the way it's simple and kind of gets people thinking about how to plan things.
I sent a quick link. Risers at NSTA this year, I got to see him when he was at Ancela. They did a half day with the phenomena of playing a record just using a needle and a cone of paper. And they've got 5 different types of storylines now, like whether you want to problematize something, or there's all these different approaches they've kind of split it into. And that's all at his website if you go on there and look at the tools. But it's like they keep getting more nuanced and sophisticated, which I suppose is a good thing, but just some things to think about with his tools. They're not standing in one place. They keep adding things, hopefully for the better.
Well, one of the things I keep telling my colleagues is we might come back 2 years from now and look at this unit, this storyline that we've developed, and it's like, we can do better than that. So it's part of an ongoing development and for all of us. So it's not a matter of we've got this right away. We've got to at least step up and try something out and not be frozen and say, well, I don't have support from everybody, or I can't get a whole team together. And, you know, when Jody says she's got to do some things by herself sometimes, you know what, we've got to all take a little step by ourselves, and that's going to come out in the long run, support our students in the long run, which is why we're here, is to help students think better and be excited about science and use it throughout their lives, even if it's not a science related career that they're actively engaged in science. At least problem solving and understanding the situations our society's faced with.
Has
And just
anybody?
add on to that.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, James.
I wondered if anybody was following that work with Brian Reiser, where they're going to put out a free middle school curriculum. I forget what it's called right now, but they're working on it in New York, and in a year we should be able to see it. But they've put together an integrated 6, 7, 8 with fully worked out into a curriculum. So it's something to maybe, even if people aren't ready or you haven't jumped on yet, the nice thing is there might be some good examples coming along.
Awesome. I was just going to add on to it, Dan, what you were saying. Just, you know, I love it that this is an iterative process, because that's science. You know, we're using science to learn how to teach science in a way, and that's exciting, I think.
And that's great too when you see people like Reiser at Northwestern and the researchers that are coming out. And I don't know if you've read the book. There was Andrew Stuhlman out of California last year, wrote the book Science Blind, and looks at the intuitive processes of how people think and learn. And that's also something that's kind of informed our unit, because we were writing a storyline based on evolution and looking at the 2 chapters that he wrote. He basically does a lot of research in the psychology and understanding how people learn about evolution and some of the preconceptions and misconceptions that hold up that thinking. And that's another great resource to look at. It's called Science Blind. It came out last, I think, May or so. Well, I think we're kind of wrapping up here. Anybody else have any insights where you're at with your district, or some suggestions for next steps?
I just appreciate districts that are diving in deeper and utilizing specific tools are now able to say, this is how we thought about it. This is how we attempted to put it to work. This is our processing so far. And it makes it more real and practical for teachers that are hesitant or think, well, you know, we do that. Well, maybe we don't, because look at this. Like, look how intense the learning is. And it's the student learning, not the teacher learning, the teacher doing all the work, student learning. We're starting to see practical examples, video clips on Twitter, a lot of ways to show the potential. And then people start to get motivated. So I really appreciate all those that are willing to share. This is how my district is doing it. This is the tool we've utilized. So I really appreciate this today.
Well, I think that's the key, is, you know, James, you've been it's been really nice, because whatever you guys are doing at LPS, it seems like you guys are willing to share, which is great for us smaller districts who don't have necessarily the resources or the school district that would allow us the opportunity to work on some of this stuff. So I think that's the way we get a buy-in, is we take some of this stuff that is happening within the state and nationwide, and we implement it into some of these classrooms, and some of these teachers all of a sudden have that aha moment. So I think that's amazing. But I do want to thank Dan for having this conversation, because I think, even though there's a small group of us here, every time we have these conversations with one another, I think we all leave with some ideas, and maybe, that we can take back to our classrooms or to our administration, to our bosses or whatever. So, and just a better understanding of what we need at the state level, but also where we're going.